So today we're going to discuss the fourth term paper, FWC fourth term paper, April 2021, the latest paper. So yeah, April 2021 is supposed to be fifth term, but due to all these issues, it's now the fourth term actually. We'll be having the exams in October. So from April now, how many months do we have? May, June, July, August, September, October. Like 5 months, roughly 5 months, around 150 days. If you just Okay, fine. So what I have to say, tell you guys is this 150 days. Uh, if you just focus on what you have studied up to now, that's enough for you to go for a good grade, really. Because in physics, you must be doing electricity, and in chemistry, you must be doing equilibrium. And I don't know about biology, so that's a lot. That's a lot. You can even go for an A. You can do almost four structures in four structured question in physics, four essay questions in physics. You must be able to do around 35, 40 MCQs. So I'm not asking you not to study the other units, but whatever you have covered up now is more than enough for you to go for a good grade. All right, fine. Now, first question. Unit of the ratio, rotational inertia divided by linear inertia. Now, when you say rotational inertia is represented by moment of inertia. So that is, we all know that is kilogram meter squared, and linear inertia is represented by mass. So that is kilograms. So the answer is going to be meter squared. Very straightforward. Third one is the answer first. All right. Inertia in rotational motion is represented by moment of inertia, and inertia in linear motion is represented by mass. Very easy. So kind of physical quantity having same dimension as that of Planck's constant. Now, when you talk about Planck's constant, it is E equals hf. You must have learned about this in chemistry. In physics, maybe not, but in chemistry, you must have come across this. So, you know, Planck constant has the equation energy divided by frequency. So, if you take the dimensions, it is going to be ml squared t minus 2 divided by dimensions of frequencies t minus 1. T minus 1. So, you are getting a dimension ml squared t minus 1. ml squared t minus 1. So, it can't be force because force is ml t minus 2. It can't be energy. Energy is ml squared t minus 2. It can't be power. It's ml squared t minus 3. It can't be linear momentum because it is ml t minus 1. ml t minus, these things should be running in your blood by now. ml squared t minus 2 and ml squared t minus 3. Therefore, the only possible answer is angular momentum, because angular momentum is equal to I omega, where I has the dimensions of ml squared, the moment of inertia, omega, the angular velocity, has the dimension of t minus 1. Hence, the answer is fifth. Third one, these are small things. I'll quickly rush through these things. Third one, reading of micrometer screw gauge measuring the diameter of metallic sphere shown in the figure. Zero error due to rusting of anvil. Due to rusting of anvil. So when it rusts, what happens? Oxide layers are formed. Therefore, it has to be a positive zero error, isn't it? It has to be a positive zero error. So you have to figure this out. Positive zero, because both the answers are available for you. During rusting, oxide layers are formed. Therefore, it will be positive zero error of the instrument is 0.04. So this is the positive zero error, 0.04. Then find the accurate value of the diameter. Accurate value of the diameter. So they have given the pitch and the number of circular scale divisions. If using that, you can find out the least count very quickly. Now, least count, we know it's pitch divided by number of circular scale divisions. But anyway, normally for micrometer screw gauge, it is usually 0.01. It doesn't change. But anyways, to confirm it, you can do it. And then you first take the reading of this diagram. The reading will be how much? This is 0.5 in micrometer screw gauge, not 1. Careful. The line on top will be 1. This is 0.5. So it's 0.5 plus 29th unit is coinciding. So 29 into the least count is 0.01. Hence the answer is 0.79 millimeter. That answer is not there. That answer is not there, luckily, right? Because you need to make the correction for zero error. Now, are you going to add it or subtract it? That's the question. Now, when both the answers are there. When you add 0.04 to this one, second is there. When you subtract from this, fifth is there. So obviously the answer is fifth, because it is positive zero error. So accurate reading will be given by the reading you take, and then you subtract the positive zero error from that, the magnitude of positive zero error. So 0.79 is the reading, Positive 0 is 0.04. According to the question, answer is 0.75 millimeters. So you need to be careful. If you take this as 1, then you will get a different answer. I think you will get third as the answer. And if you consider it as negative 0 error, you get the second one as the answer. Some, areas where you have to be careful about. So the first 3 questions are done. 3, 5, 5 are the answers. Question number 4 is about laser light. Now, when you say laser light, it is light, just an electromagnetic wave. Shows all the properties of light. Okay, it can be refracted, reflected, polarized, everything. All right. Energy of a photon of laser beam with certain frequency is more than the energy of a normal light beam with that frequency. Wrong. That this more than part is wrong. This is incorrect. This part is in more than. No, that's wrong. It can't be that because just like I said, laser light and normal light, they all have the same properties. We just use the equation E equals H. That's it. This H is common for both the laser beam, for both the laser beam and normal light. Okay, so first one is wrong. If A is wrong, you can eliminate the answers. If A is wrong, third is wrong, fifth is wrong. So you have only 3 answers to choose from. Laser beam cannot be refracted by using glass prism. Again, incorrect, because laser beam shows all the properties of normal light. It can be refracted, reflected, diffracted, polarized, and can undergo interference, everything. So B is wrong. If B is wrong, people, obviously only C is correct. There's no all wrong answer, right? Why is that? All photons in this laser beam have same energy, same phase, same direction. That's why you get that beam of light. You get that beam of light. They don't get scattered. They have same energy, same phase, and same direction. That's why you get the beam. But if you take normal light from a bulb, it scatters everywhere. No? It scatters everywhere. But here you get a strong beam of light because of this. So C is definitely correct. Laser questions could be more challenging, but this was very convenient, right? So that's done. And the fifth one now. Moving on to the fifth one. Right. Both ends open resonance tube make fundamental note 600 hertz. Right. So with that, you can quickly draw the diagram like this. Okay. Both ends open. Fundamental note means this. Right. And now we know if you take this as the length, okay, L. Here the fundamental note is given by 600 hertz. Yes. So what are the other information you can graph on this? Here, you know, this is lambda by 2, isn't it? This is a half loop. This is, sorry, this is, yeah, half loop. So it's actually one loop inside. We know the length of one loop is lambda by 2. So L is equal to lambda by 2. That is lambda is equal to 2L. Is equal to 2L. Right? So if we equal f lambda, v is constant, f is 600, and lambda is 2L. That is 1200 L. That is the speed of sound in M. If one end of this tube is closed, now they are closing the tube, one end is closed, but remember the length won't change, right? Length will be L, length will continue to be L. What is the frequency of the fundamental node? Now we have to find the new frequencies. For that, first of all, you have to draw the fundamental mode. That is going to be this. When you have one end closed, we know you'll get the antinode at the open end and the node at the closed end. And right now, different frequency, different wavelength. I'll use the lambda naught for this wavelength. Right. So this wavelength now lambda and the frequency Z. And we know this is half a loop. Therefore, L is equal to lambda by 4, and that gives me lambda is equal to 4L. And F is what we're supposed to find out. V is equal to F lambda, V is 1200 L. F we have to find out into lambda is 4L. Therefore, F is going to be equal to how much? 300 hertz. 300 hertz. Same tube, one end, both end open, then one end closed. Fine. So for 300 hertz, 300 hertz is the answer, which is the second answer, isn't it? Yes, the second answer. Again, a very straightforward question. Third question. Sorry, sixth question. The magnification power of a given compound microscope on a normal adjustment is, that's it. They have not given any anything. They have not given F4, Fe, or none of that is given. This should be a Fe actually, right? It should be Fe. There's a printing error, I think. But they have given you, this is the initial object, 1 centimeter height, and the final object is 9 centimeter of height. Okay, 1. This height we don't know what that height is. I mean, let's take it as h. 1 h centimeter, and here 9 centimeter. Okay, right. They're asking for the magnifying power. The answer is 9. That's it. Magnification power means by how many times did the size of the object increase when you compare it with the final image object. If you want more clarity, then capital M is written as MO into ME. Angular magnification is equal to linear magnification of object length and linear magnification of eyepiece. What is linear magnification of object length? That is going to be image height over object height. The image is h. Here, this is the image for this. So image height over object height into magnification of eyepiece is going to be image height over object height. Then it's 9. That's all. Okay, definitely. So 9 is the answer. No need to worry about that. 7th one. The phenomenon of beats happens only when constructive interference happens. Now, I hope you can remember how beats are formed. Well, when two waves of slightly different frequencies should overlap. Slightly different frequencies should overlap, right? So what happens there is when you combine them, if you take F1 and F2, different frequencies, F1 and F2 are not equal. Then you will get a wave like this. This is what you get. If it is like symmetric and all these two, and if there's a slight difference between the frequencies, you get the resulting wave will look like this. So in that resulting wave, you can see there are points where you have the amplitude very low. So this is going to be the destructive interference. This part. And you can see parts where the amplitude is very high. They are constructive interference. Beats is a phenomenon related to interference. Hence, definitely the answer is people. 4th one. Beats doesn't have any relationship with the diffraction. When frequency will become equal, so definitely these are wrong. Between the first 3, you should definitely have to go for the 3rd one because it has both constructive and destructive interference. This is a proof for you. These are 2 individual waves. When they overlap, beat waves, they are formed. This is how beats look like. Right? Both will be there. The answer is 3rd. Let's move on to question number 8 now. The next question. ABC shown in the figure have masses M, capital M respectively. They are in smooth flow. Sphere A is moving with velocity U, while B, C are at rest. If linear elastic collision occurs between the spheres, which of the following statement is false? Linear elastic collision means, explaining this, a few things very quickly. When both are equal, when this comes at U, right after the collision, this stops. No, this is at rest. This will stop, and the both are M, simple M, and this will move at the same speed, V. And there are instances where this is small and this is really big, mass-wise also. Mass, especially mass, not the size. Guys, not the size. I'm talking about mass. Mass is bigger. Then what will happen? This is at rest initially, and this is moving towards it. What will happen now? This will bounce back. This will bounce back. This will move to the other side at a different speed. But when you add their kinetic energies, it will be equal to half mv squared. That's very important. Okay, when you add the kinetic energies, this here half mv squared should be equal to half m v2 squared plus half capital M v1 squared, and the momentum also should be equal, right? And then the other thing, when simple m, then the one which comes bigger, this one, there, when this is at rest, what will happen now? After the collision, both will be moving in the same direction, but simple M will be moving little faster. This will be moving slower. So this is what happens during elastic collisions when 2 objects are there, right? So what will I say? What will happen if capital M is smaller than simple M? How many collisions are going to occur? This will collide with this. This will collide with this. After that, yeah, only two, because it's like this. After this collides with this, A will stop, B will move. And then B will collide with C. Since C has smaller mass than B, what will happen? Both B and C will be moving in the same direction. A has stopped. So only two collisions. That's correct. This is correct. I can't draw for everything. Do you want me to draw or what? Okay, let's do it this way. Now I'll just draw what will it look like after the collisions are over. Two collisions. After two collisions, A will be at rest and the B will be moving. C will also be moving like this. But V2 will be larger than V1, so they will never meet again. Right? What about this one? If capital M is bigger than simple M, collision number one, collision number two. Two collisions are definitely going to happen. Two collisions definitely going to happen. The third collision is the problem. Then B will bounce back. Correct? B will bounce back. C will be going forward, and then B will come back and hit A again. And then B will stop. A will be moving. So this is A, B, C. Right. Let's see what's going to happen in this one after the second one. A will be going to the left. B would have stopped, and C will be moving to the right because C is larger and it will be moving at a lower speed. This is what's going to happen, but there will be three collisions. So 2 is also correct. There will be three collisions. 1, 2 bounces back, it B collides with A again. If capital M is equal to simple M, 2 collisions will occur. That's correct. When capital M is equal to simple M, what will you see after all the collisions are over? A would have stopped. B also would have stopped. And C will be moving at same speed, V. You use the initial speed, please. Okay, right. And how many collisions? 1. Then this will go collide with that. That's it. 2 collisions. If capital M is equal to M, spheres A and B will come to rest and spheres P will move towards right with velocity U. Yeah, that's also correct, isn't it? That's what I was explaining all this time. When both the masses are equal, that is how the collision happens. Therefore, obviously, the answer is going to be fifth one. Why is that? If capital M is equal to 2M, sphere A will come to rest and spheres B and C will move towards right with velocity U by 3. That's wrong. B and C. They're talking about this situation on the. I mean, capital M is bigger, right? Yeah, capital M is bigger in this situation. So they won't be moving to the right. That's wrong. That's anyway wrong. So the answer is definitely the fifth one. Okay. Right. It's like you don't have to draw diagrams and all. You should do this in your head. I just drew it to explain it to you. You should do it in your head and figure out the answers. Can't have any mistakes there. Okay. Right. Then moving on. Question number 9. Question number 9. They're asking about the average velocity. Average velocity. Average velocity means, what is the average velocity? Average velocity is given by the equation total displacement divided by total time. Total displacement divided by total time. So we need to find out the total displacement. For that, we need the area. Well, this is 0, this is 10, this is 15. So it is like 2:3 the ratio. 2:3 the ratio. Hence, this also should be 2:3 the ratio. So total time is 15. So this should be 5. Should be 5. So this length is going to be 5 seconds and this length is going to be 10 seconds. Right. And the displacement, now we know to find the displacement from a velocity time graph, you need to get the area, right? When you get the area of this part, it is half into base into height, that is 25. I took times like this. Now this length is 10, this length is 15, isn't it? This length is 10, this length is 15. So it is 2:3. Oh, sorry. Wait. Made a mistake here. Should not be 5. It's 10, right? It's 10, is it? No, not 10, not 10. Sorry, it's 6. Sorry, 6. It should be 6. 6. Sorry, 6. Yeah. Right. Thank you for clarifying that. It's 6. It's actually 6. Because it's 2:3. Sorry, 15, 52. So this is 6. So this particular length is going to be 6, and this is going to be 9. And this is wrong. This has to be 6 then. Sorry, yeah, right. half into 6 into 10, and that is 30. And this part area, if you take, that is a half into base into height. So that is 135 over 2. 135 over 2 is how much? 135 over 2. That is 62.5. Yeah. So this part is 10 into 6 into half, 30. And this part is 9 into 15, 135 divided by 2, 62.5. And then people, what is going to be the resulting displacement then? Average velocity. So displacement is going to be, overall displacement is going to be minus 32.5. That means the object starts somewhere here. The object goes here, stops, and then returns, and then goes somewhere here. The average display. This is the displacement. That is going to be 32.5. But if you divide 32.5 by 15, will we get any of these answers? No, we wouldn't. Correct? Yeah, it's 67.5. Sorry, 67.5. 67.5. Not 62.5. Maybe 67.5. Need the displacements, these two. 37.5. So when you divide 37.5 by 15, it should be 2.5. But in the scheme, they have given the third answer, which is 6.5. I'm wondering how they got it. If they're getting 6.5, that means the displacement should be 97.5 average velocity. So there we have a small issue here. When you want to find average velocity, what you need to do is you have to put total displacement. Now that is 67.5 magnitude. They're asking, there's no minus sign and all. So it's 67.5 minus 30 divided by total time is 15. So that is 37.5 divided by 15. Hence the answer is 2.5 ms minus 1. So without any doubt, the answer should be fifth. There's no doubt in that. But the scheme says 3, answer 3. The problem is in Tamil medium paper, they are saying பொருளின் சராசரி கதியாது. பொருளின் சராசரி கதி. So kadi means speed in Tamil. Average velocity means they should have said vegam, but in English medium paper it's velocity. So let's go with fifth answer. All right. So if you are an English medium student, you should have got the fifth answer. If you mark third, it's wrong because they're talking about average velocity, not average speed. If average speed, how do you find average speed? They ask average speed, and that is given by total distance. Total distance over total time. Total distance means people, regardless of the direction, you have to add everything. 30 plus 67.5 divided by 15. Hence, this is 97.5 divided by 15, 6.5 meters per second. Okay, so you people can make a note of both. If they ask for average speed, you have to put the total distance. Average displacement, sorry, average velocity means you have to put the total displacement. Now, question number 10. Talking about question number 10. What does it say? An object with certain mass is released from Earth's surface at a certain height equals to half of the radius of Earth. Right, so Earth is there and they are releasing the object from a height, and that height is half of the radius of Earth. So initial velocity is going to be 0 because it is released, and the radius of Earth, if you take it as capital R, this height is R by 2. What is the velocity of the object when it reaches the Earth's surface? And the answers are in VE, where VE is given as escape velocity on Earth's surface. We all know escape velocity is given by the equation. Sorry, escape velocity is given by the equation square root of 2gm over r in this context. That means The escape velocity they have mentioned is the escape velocity from Earth's surface. Therefore, you have to put Earth's radius. Also, you can say it's square root of 2 simple gr, but we don't have to worry about that because we're not talking about gravitational field intensity or anything. So this is the equation. Then what is the question? What is the velocity of the object when it reaches Earth's surface? Right. So when the object reaches Earth's surface, it will have a velocity v. We have to find that. Now, how do you do that? Right. I'll take these 2 points as points A and point B. Whatever the energy point has at A, it should have at B as well because we're not talking about any energy losses. So what are the energies the object has at A? It has gravitational potential energy, doesn't it? Gravitational potential energy at A. It does not have any kinetic energy because it's at rest, it's dropped. And then at B, point B, it has gravitational potential energy and kinetic energy as well because it will have velocity there. It will have velocity too. So gravitational potential energy at A, it is minus g m simple m over r. R is distance from the center. Now we all know the equation for gravitational potential energy is given by this. At this point, if you're supposed to write gravitational potential energy, it is minus g m simple m over r, where r is this whole distance from the center, and capital M is the mass of the planet, simple m is the mass in mass, small mass, minus gmm. So it's going to be minus gmm over capital R plus R by 2. It is 3R by 2 equal to gravitational potential energy at point B. It has gravitational potential energy because we have to put the distance from the center now. So at B it is minus gmm over capital R plus kinetic energy at B is half mv squared. Right? Then we can simplify the stuff which we can simplify. For example, now what are the things which could be simplified? Simple m can be simplified. That's all. Yeah. Let's get it done then. We have v squared over 2, and this goes to the other side. So this 2 will go up. Then I'll be getting gm over capital R. This goes to the other side. Minus 2 goes up. So I'll be getting 2gm over 3R equals v squared by 2. All right. So if you subtract this, you will be getting gm over 3R. Actually, 2gm over 3R equals v squared. That means v is equal to square root of 2gm over 3R. And what I can do is I can take this 3 out, root 3 out. That means I can write it as 1 over root 3 multiplied by root of 2gm over r. Why am I doing that? Because root of 2gm over r is our escape velocity. So 1 over root 3 is there. This whole thing is escape velocity. Final answer is escape velocity divided by root 3. So the correct answer is 4th. Well, the common mistakes you might have made is you might have considered the gravitational potential energy at B as 0. It's incorrect. When it comes to gravitational field, you have to make sure, you have to know that the distance we consider in this equation is the distance from the center, not from the surface. So you have to be careful about that. Question number 11. P wave and S wave are produced at F inside the Earth due to earthquake, and they reach seismic data recording station A, which is on Earth's surface. If the time difference between them to reach A from F is 20 minutes, find the distance AF, right? This is a past paper question, isn't it? Past paper question. So from F, both P waves and S waves are going to travel. We know S waves are slow, P waves are fast, and S waves are traveling at, they have given the speed, so we don't have to figure it out. They have helped us 600 kilometer per hour, and S waves are traveling at 500 kilometer per hour. Right now, the time difference is 20 minutes hour. So you have to be a little careful with the units as well. Now, let's say the time taken for P wave to reach A is T. I have taken the time taken for P wave to reach this is T, and the distance between F and A will take it as D. How long will it take for S wave to reach A? Say time is in minutes. So I'll put T minutes. Later we'll convert it to hours. T minutes. So how many? It will be T T plus 20. Good. T plus 20. Because they have given us a time difference. Now, since S is slower, it will take more time. Since S is slower, it will take more time. P will take less time. So it should be T. If you take time taken by S to reach point A as T, then here you should put T minus 20. But I have taken for P, it's T now, then this. Then you just use the equation S equals displacement equals velocity into time, because the object, the waves are traveling at constant velocity. That's the assumption. So S is the displacement is D. For P wave, when you apply this equation, velocity of P waves is 600 into T. That's the first equation. And when you apply the same equation for S wave, displacement is again D. That's what we have to find out. V into T. V will be 500. Time will be T plus 20 in minutes. T is in minutes. So what can we do? We can substitute this for T. D over 500. D over 600. Or else maybe we can equate them and find T first. 600. So for equation 1 and 2, you can equate them. 600T, that is equal to 500T plus 10,000. That's 100T equals 10,000. And the final answer is T is equal to 100. 100 minutes. 100 minutes, okay? T is equal to 100 minutes. Remember, T was substituted in minutes. So when you substitute that here, yeah, T is equal to 100 minutes. So D now is equal to 600 T. That will be 600 multiplied by now 100 minutes. 100 minutes means 100 over 60, isn't it? Hours. Because now you have to be a little careful here. 600 is in kilometer per hour. So time must be substituted in hours to get the final answer. So 100 over 60 hour. Therefore, what is the answer, people? Third one, isn't it? Third one is the answer. Wait, no. Sorry. Not third one. 1,000. 660, 10 into 100 is 1,000. Sorry, 1,000 kilometers is the answer. Sorry, fifth one. Sorry. Got to carry it a bit. Fifth one is the answer. Good. So you have to be a little careful with the units, huh? You have to be a little careful with the units. And anyway, if you put 100 and multiply that by 600, you are not getting the answer. There's no answer like that. So this is how you do it. There's a question in past paper 2009, if I can remember it, a spider sending waves, 2 waves towards an insect, and the time difference was given. It's just the same question. No change. Right. Okay, then the answer is fifth, settled. 12th one. By how many decibel does the sound intensity level decrease when power of speaker is decreased to 40%? So we used maroon for 11. Let's go with green for 12. Power of the speaker is decreased to 40%. Right. So when you decrease the power, what will happen? When you decrease the power, what's going to happen now? It's like this. The sound source is here, and it will have a certain power, right? And then at a certain distance, now we are talking about a certain distance, we are going to consider there will be a sound intensity and sound intensity level. We know intensity, sound intensity is given by power over area. Power over area. So power over 4 pi r square. Now in this question, they are not changing the position of the person who is listening to that. So R is constant. Therefore, your intensity, sound intensity is proportional to power. Hope you understood it. Normally in other questions, we don't change the power of the sound source, but we rather change the distance from the sound source. Here, they are not changing the distance. No, people. Yeah, it's the same place, but power is changed. So I will change. Right. So if you take initial intensity, I1, yeah, okay, fine. So initial intensity, let's say I1, that is proportional to power P. And the final intensity is the power decreased to 40. Decreased to 40, not decreased by 40. Decreased to 40% means the new power is 0.4 P. 0.4 P. Okay, right. So when you decrease the power, how many decibel? Okay, when you decrease the power, intensity will also decrease. If intensity decreases, beta will also decrease. So I will do something like this. When I will divide these two, I1 over I2 is given by what? 1 over 0.4. That is actually 2.5. So that's a good news because they have given us log 2.5. And when there are two different intensities, there will be two different intensity levels. Now the intensity level corresponding to I1, it's beta 1. Intensity level corresponding to I2 is beta 2. We all know that equation. What is that equation, people? The equation is change in sound intensity level delta beta, which is beta 1 minus beta 2. It's given by 10 log I1 over I2. Always use this equation. Okay, 10 log I1 over I2. Then beta 1 minus beta 2 is what we are supposed to find out. The change in intensity level. How many decibels does the sound intensity level decrease? That's a change. 10 log of I1 over I2 is 2.5. Log of 2.5 is zero point 0.4. So log 0.4. Sorry, not 0.4, just 0.4 into 0.4. Final answer is 4 decibels. So fifth is the answer. 1 second. 4 decibels. Okay, 4 decibels. Right. Well, moving on to the next part. Question number 13. I hope this is clear. If you have any issues, you can talk to me. Question number 13. Plus Q charge is placed on lagged neutral spherical conducting shell. Which of the following best represents the charge distribution in the inner and outer surface of the sphere? Okay, people. Now we have this the point charge. You can see it is not exactly in the middle. It's not exactly in the middle because if it had been in the middle, it should have been somewhere here, na? So in all the diagrams, if you notice, it is not in the middle. It's somewhat towards right. And I hope you can remember a past paper question where they had asked about when you place a charge on right hemisphere or left hemisphere, how the electric flux changes. Okay. So what happens is when you have a sphere kept like this, the area closer to this charge will have a higher electric flux this side. So this is how the electric field lines are going to be here. They will be denser. But when you go away from this charge, what happens? The electric field lines will start to get less dense because the electric field intensity reduces as you go away from the charge to this side. And when the charge is closer to right hemisphere, right hemispherical surface, this part will have more negative charges will be attracted towards it. All right. So the problem is, uh, yeah, the problem is that, and you can see the problem here is it's equally distributed, which is incorrect. It will be equally distributed if this was at the center. Why this is incorrect? You can see this part is blank. I mean that doesn't make any sense. And this again equally distributed, and the positive charges here. Positive charges will have no impact because the outer positive charges are not impacted by this. Correct? Outer positive charges are not impacted by this. The charges in the inner surface will only be impacted by the charge inside the sphere. So that's why the answer is. So you have to choose between first and third. No, no. Here this part is empty. No, it can't be like that. It should be distributed properly. And outer part of the sphere will not be influenced by this charge. No, it won't. The answer is first. Right, 13 first, uh, 12 fifth, and 11 fifth. Question number 37. What does it say? A block of mass m is thrown with horizontal velocity v towards a wedge of mass capital M, which is at rest on a smooth surface. So this part is important. Wedge is on a smooth surface, so the wedge is free to move. What is the maximum height that the block can go along the vertical surface of wedge after colliding? Assume that all the surfaces are smooth. Block and wedge can move freely, and wedge cannot tilt or topple. That means you can eliminate all the energy losses due to friction and all the other reasons. So this is just before collision, and we have to analyze what's going to happen just after the collision, right? So I'll draw a diagram which will
explain us what happens after the collision. Now this is going to climb on this, and they both are going to move together. It's going to climb on that, so they're going to move together. Well, it's going to look like this. So the wedge will remain, the wedge will continue to move, and like this, and the object would have climbed a certain height now, like this, simple M, right? But both simple M and capital M will be moving at the same velocity because they will now be moving together. Capital M, they will be moving together. So let's take that new speed as V dash. And this height is what we are supposed to find out. If this is the center of gravity, now the center of gravity is somewhere here, H. Okay, so you have to do two things here in this question. One is considering momentum. So if you say final linear momentum in this direction equal to initial linear momentum in that direction, why is that? Because to find the final velocity of the system. So final linear momentum is simple M plus capital M into V dash. Initial linear momentum is simple mv. Therefore, V dash will be equal to simple mv over simple M plus capital M. That is the new velocity of the system. And then since there is no energy loss, you can equate the mechanical energies as well. There's no energy loss because they are not like, it's just moving along the surface. It's not combining. It's not, what do you call that? There's no energy loss actually. Now, if a bullet is piercing an object and combining, then there will be energy loss as sound, heat and all. Here it's just simple image, just sliding over it and going here, smooth completely. So no energy loss will be there. Then what are the energies we have? Finally, final energy will be kinetic energy of simple M and capital M together plus gravitational potential energy of simple M. It has gained gravitational potential energy from its initial level. And before collision, the energy is kinetic energy of simple M. That's all. Okay. Total energy after collision should be equal to total mechanical energy before collision. Right, so that's it, finished. Kinetic energy of both these masses, it should be half capital M plus simple M into V dash squared plus gravitational potential energy of simple M is mgh. I think that's what we have find out, h equal to kinetic energy of simple M, that is half mv squared, initial kinetic energy, half mv squared, right? So here it's going to be half into capital M plus simple M into V dash square. Okay, I'll mark V1 here, so I'll make it V1 here also. Sorry, V1, right? It's easier. So that V1 squared should be this square, that is simple M squared V squared over capital M plus simple M whole thing squared plus mgh equal half mv squared. This is how the equation is going to be. Right, so let's simplify the things we can simplify. Other things we can simplify. Well, wait a minute. The bracket here. So things we can simplify are right. This simple M. No, one of the simple M's can be simplified in everything. I have one simple M in the answer. No, oh, yeah, it's there in the answer. And this capital M plus simple M can be simplified, isn't it? Right. And then people, what is the other equation? Then you have to continue to simplify this. This goes to the other side, so it will be half is common. Here we have v squared, here also we have v squared. So gh will be here, equal half is common. So if I take half, and m is also common. Oh, no, m is not common. V squared over 2 is common. No? V squared over 2 is common. V squared over 2. And within bracket you have a 1 here minus this whole thing. That is m over capital M plus simple M. Right? And then this can be simplified like this. You can take capital M plus simple M as the common denominator. That will give you v squared by 2 equals, sorry, v squared by 2 into capital M plus simple m minus m over capital M plus simple m. So that will result in capital MV squared over 2 capital M plus simple m. Therefore, final answer for simple h is going to be capital MV squared over 2g capital M plus simple m, isn't it? Yeah. This is the answer I'm getting. So we can settle to second one. Question number 38 is about equilibrium of forces. An object of mass 6 kg is in equilibrium on a smooth horizontal surface has 3 coplanar horizontal forces 6 Newton, 9 Newton and 12 Newton acting on the object. If one or two of the above forces are removed, the object will move with an acceleration of 2 ms minus 2. Right, 6 kg mass. So 6 kg mass is there. 3 forces are acting on it. 12 Newton and 6 Newton and 9 Newton. Like this. And the object is at rest. Object at equilibrium or object at rest. Right. Now we need an acceleration of 2 ms minus 2. How do we achieve that? Now, one thing you need to understand is the resultant of 6 and 9. The resultant of 6 and 9, if I cut them vaguely like this, resultant of 6 and 9 will be equal to what, people? 12 Newton. No? Resultant of 6 and 9, 6 Newton and 9 Newton, it's 12 Newton. This is resultant of 6 and 9. Therefore, now if equal ma, if you put F equal ma, F is equal to mass is 6 into the acceleration required is 2. So F is equal to 12 Newton. F is equal to 12 Newton. That means, so resultant force must be 12 Newton. Resultant force must be 12 Newton. So there are two ways you can achieve that 12 Newton. One method, okay. Method 1. What is method 1? You can just have 12 Newton acting on 6 kg object. Okay, so what should we do here? 6 Newton and 9 Newton removed. Both, when you remove both 6 Newton and 9 Newton, only 20 Newton will be acting on the object. It will accelerate at 2 ms minus 2. And the second method is you can remove 12 Newton. Why is that? Because we just figured out 6 Newton and 9 Newton, their resultant is how many Newton? 12 Newton. 6 kg. Okay, when forces act like this, we know the resultant of 6 and 9 is how much? 12 Newton. So here, what have we done? 12 Newton is removed. So if you want to achieve this particular acceleration, you can do two things. One is 12 only, this is okay. 6 and 9 only, that is also okay. So A and C are correct. Fourth one is the answer. Hope that is clear to everyone. When three forces are acting on an object and the object is at equilibrium, resultant of two forces will be equal in magnitude to the third force and opposite in direction. Okay, so this part should be 12 Newton. Right, that's the concept. A plastic block of height capital H is floating on the water such that it is immersed to a depth h under the water as shown in the figure. An oil of density less than plastic and immiscible in water is poured into the vessel. Consider the following statements. Right. So first of all, plastic is floating on water and oil is, now density of water is high, then density of plastic. Then only density of oil, right? So that's very important. Huh? Plastic is denser than oil. So when you put this plastic inside this oil, it will sink. Right, now starting with this relative density of plastic. Okay, now we know there are two forces acting here. What are the two forces acting? The weight and the upthrust. Weight and the upthrust. So you know weight and upthrust must be equal. I'm going to explain statement A. Upthrust is equal to weight. Upthrust is If you take the cross-sectional area to be A, submerged volume is going to be AH rho WG. Hope you guys understood it. And for weight, you have to put A capital H rho plastic. I just put rho P, rho PL, rho plastic G. That is the weight of plastic, total volume of plastic multiplied by density of plastic. So you can see G gets cancelled off, A gets cancelled off. And what are we supposed to find out? We are supposed to find out the relative density of plastic. So rho plastic divided by rho of water, that gives us simple HO capital H. But here they have given something else that is incorrect. Okay, it should have been simple HO capital H, that's all. So A is wrong. If A is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. It's either second or fourth. And B is definitely going to be correct because in both the answers B is there, but let's check. Depth H to which the block is immersed into the water will decrease if oil poured. Okay, yeah, that's correct because when you pour oil, this will happen, no? When you pour oil, people, this will happen. Now, plastic will float submerged in both oil and water. It will be like this. A part of that will be inside water, a part of that will be inside oil. It will float like this. So what are they saying? Depth H to which block is immersed in water? Exactly. See, so height depth immersed in water will decrease because now the object has to submerge to create the sufficient upthrust. But if it is if you pour oil, oil is also creating an upthrust. No? Now two upthrusts acting on this object. One is from oil, one is from water. So since it is upthrust is given by oil also, downward force is weight. It is it doesn't change. Here the whole weight is balanced only by upthrust given by water. Here the whole weight is balanced by upthrust given by water as well as oil. Therefore, submerged volume inside oil will decrease. So B is correct. It's not just because it's correct according to your answers. It's correct because of logic. This logic. If oil is poured continuously, the state that the block only floats in oil cannot occur. That is correct. Why is that, people? Tell you that is because density of oil is less than density of plastic. So always plastic will sink in oil. It won't float in oil. Okay. So always a part of the plastic has to be inside water. It will float in water and then it will be like this. That's okay. But it won't complete now. It won't go completely outside water. It's not possible because it has to, what do you call that? It will sink. It has a density higher than that of oil. If you had a density lower than that of oil, that is okay. But since plastic has a density higher than that of oil, it can't completely be just inside oil because it will sink. It will go down. So it's like this. This is the problem there. If you put that plastic inside oil, it will go down completely because oil can't provide sufficient upthrust to make that plastic float. So oil will need the support of water also. This is the only possibility. So the answer is fourth one. Think like that, will you? If you put that only inside oil, this will happen. So to make it float, oil will need some extra upthrust to support its weight, plastic's weight. So that plastic definitely has to to be to submerge slightly inside water to create that additional upthrust. A wheel of radius r rolls on the floor with angular velocity omega without slipping. Point A is on the wheel such that it makes an angle theta with vertical. What is the magnitude of velocity A relative to Earth? Okay. Now, when an object rolls, it performs both linear motion and rotational motion. When it performs both linear motion and rotational motion. So if you consider those components individually, let me do that very quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to consider both the motions separately. First, when the linear motion happens, sorry, we'll draw another color to avoid the confusions. When linear motion happens, we know every point in this sphere will be moving at the same velocity. For linear motion, I'll be using red color. So the point in question is this point A. So due to linear motion, point A will be moving in this direction, V, and that V is equal to how much, people? R omega. Hope you can remember. Every point in this will be moving at the same velocity due to linear motion of this. So V equal R omega. And the center of mass also will be moving V equal R omega. Every point due to linear motion will be having the same velocity, even this point. But these other points are not important. Our point of consideration is point A. That is one. And then you have the rotational motion, right? Rotational motion. So due to rotational motion, we know the object will have the tangential velocities or tangential speeds, and at different points it will have different values. No. This is due to linear motion. It will be like this. It will go in this direction. The object is going to go towards left. Now, due to rotational motion, it will be tangential. Since it is rotating this way, due to rotational motion, at this point, the velocity will be this way, R omega. And at point A, it will be like this, R omega. And at this point, it will be like this. The problem is in this question, they are not asking about all these points, R omega. And at this point, it will be like this, R omega, likewise. And in the middle, what will be the velocity? Zero, because rotation due to rotational motion, rotational motion, the tangential velocity is given by radius into omega. For the center, radius is zero. This. So this is point A. Careful. Focus on point A. Our focus point this A. So at point A, if you notice carefully, I will draw here now. Due to what motion? Linear motion, it will have a velocity in this direction. And due to rotational motion, it will have a velocity in this direction. Right. And the velocity due to rotational motion is perpendicular to radius. So this is R omega. This is also R omega. Both are R omega. Right. And this angle is theta now. Well, this angle is theta. If that angle is theta, we know what is this angle, guys? This angle. What is this angle? Theta. That angle is also theta. Na? Why? Alternate angle. And then this angle is also theta. Hope you can understand that. This angle is also theta. This angle is also theta. This angle is also theta. Right. Now, what we need to do now is, we need to I'll redraw it. What is the angle between this R omega and this R omega, guys? Tell me now. What is the angle between R omega and R omega? Now, this is R omega. This is also R omega. Now, it's a bit messy there. That's why I'm drawing it separately. Right. You can see the angle between this is theta. Then what about this angle? This angle is going to be 180 minus theta, isn't it? 180 minus theta. 180 minus theta. It is 180 minus theta, not 90 plus theta, wrong. 90 plus theta is wrong. Should be 180 minus, this part is theta. No? So it should be 180 minus theta. Because this is theta. If this is theta, this whole thing is 180 minus theta. Okay, now when you have two vectors like this, you must have learned in mechanics, when you have two vectors like this, F and F, and if this angle is theta, and you can find the resultant of that. What is resultant? Resultant is given by 2f cos theta by 2. That is how what resultant is given. Now, the resultant of these two, what is the magnitude of velocity at A relative to flow? Right. So relative to flow means you have to consider everything. Relative to flow means you have to consider both. If they had said relative to wheel, it's different. Relative to vehicle, it's different. So it's relative to flow means you have to consider both. You have to consider both, and then the resultant. Now, people, resultant here will be, now we know R is equal to 2f cos theta by 2, right? So it's going to be R is equal to, sorry, R is equal to 2 into f. Instead of f, you can put R omega. into, instead of cos theta by 2, now cos within bracket, it is 180 minus theta over 2. So that is R means final R, resultant. I'll just say R dash. Right. Resultant is going to be equal to 2R omega cos. Inside what will you be getting? 90 minus theta by 2. 180 divided by 2 is 90. Theta divided by 2 is 2. So I'm getting what is cos 90 minus theta by 2, people? R dash is equal to 2R omega sine theta by 2. 2R omega sine, because cos 90 minus theta is equal to sine theta. Here we have cos 90 minus theta by 2. Therefore, it has to be sine theta by 2. So what is the answer for this question? Should be fifth, isn't it? Answer is fifth.
An elastic string is separated as 3 parts and vibrated. Fundamental frequencies of each are F1, F2, and F3 separate respectively. What is the fundamental frequency of that string? Right, so there's a string like this, according to the question. And that is separated to 3 parts, and for each part they are performing this so I just draw it and mark it. Let's say this is A, this is B, and then in between they have C, D, likewise C, D. Now they have not given the lengths and all. They didn't say equal parts. No, they are not saying equal parts, so we can't take the lengths to be equal. I'll take this length as L1, take this length as L2, and take this length as L3. Now tell me what is common for all these wires, all these parts. What is common? Tension will be common. Tension will be common. Same tension will be acting on these parts. So same tension will be acting because they are stretched and fixed to same points. Same tension will be acting. Okay, right. And then frequencies, fundamental frequencies given F1, here F2, the fundamental frequencies of each parts, and this is F3. Okay, right. So we know the equation for fundamental frequency for a string is given by 1 over 2L square root of P over M. So P over M is a constant for the whole wire. So I'll go with K for that. So it's K over 2L actually. Right. So F1 is equal to what? K over 2L1. So that I can say L1 equals K over 2F1. I will tell you why I'm doing this. Likewise, you can find out the other two lengths also, no? L2 and L3. You don't have to do every step. You can say here it is K over 2F2. This is K over 2F3. K over 2F3. Right. And moving on. Now, if you take the whole string, they are talking about the whole string now. If you take the whole string, now you have to consider from A to B directly. A to B directly, yeah. A to B directly. Right. Now, when you talk about A to B, the whole thing, same tension will be experienced by the string. I have taken another one constant, that is simple M is constant, now people. Simple M is mass per unit length. There are 3 different parts of the same wire. So simple M will be constant. Right here, the total length now, L is equal to L1 plus L2 plus L3, isn't it? That's the total length. Therefore, the equation F0 is given by 1 over 2L square root of T over M. Now the new fundamental frequency is what we are supposed to find out, equal to 1 over 2. For L, you will put L1 plus L2 plus L3. Here it is going to be what? Into root T over M, we have taken it as K. Okay, K. Well, then F0 is there. F0. There is this answer also. There is this answer also. Let's see. So F0 is equal to 1 over 2 into L1 plus L2 plus L3. What will it give? L1 plus L2 plus L3 is actually, when you add all these things, K over 2 is common, people. So K over 2 is common. Inside, you will get 1 over F1 plus 1 over F2 plus 1 over F3. You will get that. So you can substitute it here. That is K by 2 into 1 over F1 plus 1 over F2 plus 1 over F3 into K. So this K and K will get cancelled off. 2 and 2 will also get cancelled off. right? Ultimately, if you see, if you look closer, you have f naught on the left side, and on the right side you have 1 over 1 plus f plus 1 plus f2 plus 1 plus f3, right? This is the final answer, but there isn't an answer like that. So what can I do, people? What can I do? Either side, if I take it upside down, right? So we'll do this. You take this up, you take f naught down. So you will be getting 1 over f1 plus 1 over f2 plus 1 over f3. That is equal to 1 over f. It's given as f. F is the fundamental frequency, I think, the final answer, simple f. So I will take this as simple f itself. Sorry, take that simple f because final answer is f now in the answer, right? The options given. Right, so what is the answer? Should be the first one, isn't it? Should be the first one. First one, because they have given a relationship like that. So I stopped here and checked the answers. I thought this might be the answer, but no, because it's f equal 1 divided by 1 over f1 plus 1 over f2 plus 1 over f3. Then you take it up, you take this down, you'll get this as a final answer. Yeah. So first is the answer. Question number 43. They're asking for the maximum value of alpha such that the ray comes out of phase CD. That means now this ray is obviously going to go up. Yeah, refractive index into water, refractive into, this is N1. N1 is the refractive index of the glass, N1. Okay, so it's going to refract this way, and it has to undergo total internal reflection and reach this point. And if you talk about maximum value, that means at least this should be C. At least this should be C, the limit. And then this has to come out. If not, yeah, it has to come out like this. It's traveling from denser medium to rare medium. Okay. Yeah. Okay. If this is C, then this will be a smaller angle. No, definitely it's going to come out. So that is how we have to consider, isn't it? Let's see. Right. So if this is C, people, if this is C, what is this angle, guys? Tell me, what is this angle? If this is C, what is this angle? Can anyone tell me? What is this angle? It's going to be 90 minus C. It's going to be 90 minus C. Yeah, it's going to be 90 minus C. We want this ray to not to go out of AD. We needed to just undergo total internal reflection and come down. So the minimum angle at which total internal reflection happens at C doesn't happen, but we are talking about maximum value now. So we take it as C and only we have to continue with the question. Right. So first of all, we need to find this C. How do you find that C? To find that C, you have to consider this. Right. At critical refraction, this is going to be 90. This is going to be C. Important. The refractive indices, one is N1, N2 water, N1 is the glass. So according to Snell's law, N1 sin I1 equals N2 sin I2. N1 is N1 sin C equals N2. N2 is N2 into sin 90. Right. So since sin 90 is 1, you will be getting sin C equals N2 over N1. And C, that will give us C equals the critical angle here, sine inverse N2 over N1. Sine inverse N2 over N1. Right. So moving on. Now let's consider this portion. Let's consider this portion, the phase AB. There's a refraction happening, a normal refraction. On phase A, B, normal refraction is taking place. Let's try to apply Snell's law there. Right. So there, if you apply on phase AB, let's go with the same equation. N1 sin I1 equals N2 sin I2. N1 is again N2 actually this time. N2 because water is N2. Refractive index of water is N2, and sin alpha max equals N1 sin I2. What is sin I2? Sin 90 minus C. Oh, okay, interesting. Sin 90 minus C. And people, sine 90 minus C can be written as what? Cos C. Just now, a little while ago, if you write it down. So sine alpha maximum, that is going to be equal to N1 over N2. Sine 90 minus C is cos C, isn't it? Cos C. So alpha maximum is going to be equal to sine inverse this whole thing. That is N1 over N2 cos C. And then what they have done, instead of C, they have substituted the value we found out. And that's going to be alpha max equals sine inverse within bracket N1 over N2 cos of C, cos C. That is sine inverse N2 over N1. Isn't that the answer? Which answer is that? Yeah, second answer. Second answer. Cool. All right. Now, question number 44. It talks about a hollow sphere, right? A hollow sphere-like thing. Uncharged conducting ball Y. So uncharged conducting ball. So it's not charged. It does not have a resultant charge. Lying inside a charged hollow conductor. So it's a charged hollow conductor. What you need to do here is you have to compare this. When you have a hollow sphere or something like that, charged on the surface only, what will happen to electric field intensity and electric potential? That is our concern. So we know, we have learned in electric field, when you take electric field intensity, how will the graph be? Electric field intensity graph, it will look like this. It will be 0 until the surface, and then suddenly it will increase and go down. Suddenly increase and then it will go down like this. This is for E with R. And whereas the radius is capital R and this value is R. And this is 0. Okay. And if you draw for V, voltage, or not voltage, actually potential, electric potential, voltage and potential are not the same, V and R. Voltage is potential difference. So if you plot the potential will be constant and then it will reduce. Right? Because when E is 0, V has to be constant. We have learned this. Right. So if you go to the statements, electric field strength of X and Y are equal. That is wrong. At X, it will be this, there will be a value for X. This is point X. And this represents point Y, the center. So that is wrong. A is definitely wrong because now A is wrong. Why? Because electric field intensity at Y is 0, but electric field intensity at X can't be 0. It's wrong. So if A is wrong, first one is wrong, fifth one is wrong, third one is wrong. It's either second or fourth. Again, B is going to be definitely correct. Electric potential of X and Y are equal. Yes, here the graph. So that is okay. Anyway, that is okay. Now the problem is C. Electric potential of Y will change if ball Y touched with conductor X. Will it make any change, people? I don't think, right? Because the inner surface is not charged. Inner surface is not charged. This is also not charged. Then no, uncharged, careful, uncharged. Therefore, if this had been charged, if this was carrying a charge, if it had touched this, then electric charge would have traveled from here to here. Then the things would have changed. But since both the inner surface and this is not charged, then no, it won't make any change. It won't make any change. Therefore, C is also wrong. C is also wrong. So the answer is second. I repeat. This is not charged. This is not charged. So inner surface, you can see inner surface is also neutral. So when neutral and neutral they touch, there's going to be no change. You have learned by induction. You want to, when there's plus Q here and when there's no Q here, and then when you bring them both into contact, charge will travel from here to here until electric potentials are equal. Here, both the inner surface and the outer surface, they are right. These two are the same potential, though there won't be any change in electric charge. Equal potential inside and this. Hence, there is no need for charges to travel from one to other. So the answer for this question is second. They are indirectly asking you this concept to see whether you can remember this. They are just trying to distract you by giving you a different weird shape. Just compare that to this. That's all. Charges in capacitors A, C in the electric circuit shown in the figure respectively are. So we have to focus on these two capacitors. But when you look at this diagram, it's a symmetric diagram, isn't it, people? It's a symmetric diagram. Look at the center one, C is there, 4 microfarad, and this 2 microfarad and this 2 microfarad. So look at this now, this point. This point is connected to negative terminal of 6-volt battery. And then look at this point. This point and this point are same. Similar here also same. I mean, it's symmetrical, so this point is common. So if you rearrange this diagram, it's going to look like this actually. There are two 6-volt batteries connected to two similar points, and there is this wait, circle and circle, circle and circle. This is the dot, and circle connected to cross, dot connected to cross. Yeah, okay. So these two and these two are also what? Parallel. These two and these two are parallel. So they will be like this. And what else? And wait, these are connected to cross. And then here is the other one. I don't know whether it's confusing. Wait. Here's the other one. This is, you can interpret this diagram to this way. Okay, see? Right. This point is similar to circle, 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 circle. Right? And if I put a cross here, this is cross, this is also cross. And this is cross, now this is dot, this is dot. And look at the batteries connected to circle and dot. Circle and dot, okay? Circle dot, done. 6 volt, 6 volt. And if you take these two capacitors, 2 microfarad and 2 microfarad, to take them both, they are connected to circle and cross, circle and cross, circle, cross, circle, cross. And this 4 microfarad capacitor is connected to dot and cross, this. So you should be able to interpret this diagram to this. And then you can change it further. How is it? 6 volt and 6 volt, guys. What is the resultant, what do you call the EMF? When you have 6 volt and 6 volt in parallel, I will put 3 answers. Tell me the answer. 6 volt, sorry, 3 volt, 6 volt, 12 volt. What is the answer? Good. That is 6 volt. Because when you put 2 batteries in parallel, EMF will still remain 6. And this 4 microfarad will remain as it is. And these two, you can shrink them. 4 microfarad. And this 2 microfarad and 2 microfarad, if you shrink them, what is the resulting capacitance? Hurry up. What will be the resulting capacitance of these 2 and 2? When 2 and 2 are in parallel, what is the resulting capacitance? 2 and 2 are parallel. It is 4 microfarad, not 1. No. When capacitors are in parallel, you have to add them. When capacitors are in series, only 1. Zainab and Zahra, careful. It's not resistors, capacitors. Now you have to be careful. Since you have done electricity also, you should be careful. When you have 2 capacitors like this, if this is 2 and this is 2, then the resultant one is 4. But when you have 2 resistors, if this is 2 and 2, then the resulting one is 1. 4 farad. Oh, okay. So 6 volt, 4 microfarad, 4 microfarad. That therefore that 6 volt is going to be separated equally across these 2 capacitors. That is 3 volt, and here it is 3 volt. Right. Now this 4 microfarad represents this 2 microfarad and this 2 microfarad. That means since they are in parallel, across this also there will be 3 microfarad, 3 volt. Across this also there will be 3 volt. Across this there will be 3 volt. So if you go back to this diagram, across A and B, it will be 3 volt potential drop. And across 4 microfarad also, it will be a 3 volt potential drop. Okay, if you want a better understanding, this is 6 volt. No? Let's take this as 0 volt. 6 volt. Here also 6 volt. Okay, here 6 volt. Here also 6 volt. So from 6, 3 is gone. From this 6 also 3 is gone. That means common voltage is 3. So 0 and 3 across this also 3. Finished. So what will you do after that? For 2 microfarad, you will be using Q equal CV. So Q equals C is 2 into voltage is 3. Answer is 6 microcoulomb. And here, this is, for this again, you use Q equals CV. C is 4, voltage is 3, final answer 12 microcoulomb. So across 2, A is 2, it is 6. 6, that means this is the answer. Second one is the answer. Melting ice of mass 100 gram at temperature 0 degrees Celsius is mixed with boiling water of mass 100 grams at temperature 100 degrees Celsius. Which graph represents the variation of theta of ice and water with time? Neglect the heat loss to the environment. Right. Now, melting ice of mass 100 grams. Melting ice, that means it is at 0 degrees Celsius. But okay. Melting ice means melting ice. So we need to start from 0, is it? Melting ice. They have not given the specific latent heat of fusion. So looks like we need to mix with boiling water of 100 grams at temperature 100. Oh no, they have given the fusion. Okay, sorry. So water is at 100. Sorry. So ice first from 0 degree, ice from ice is at 0 degrees Celsius. It should first become water at 0 degrees Celsius. Right? And on the other hand, now how much energy will be required here? That is Q equal ml. So first let's find that energy. So Q equal ml, the energy required for this process to happen. How much is that? Energy Q equal ml, mass is 0.1 because it's 100 grams into 3.36 into 10 to the power 5. So that is 3.36 into 10 to the power 4 joules. Okay, right. Now, so by the looks of the graphs, we can see that water's temperature is reducing and it is coming to a common value. Only this in this one there is a problem. Now, what is the meaning of this one? It says ice doesn't melt, water cools down. So let's quickly see. Now, ice has to gain energy. This is the heat gain. Ice is gaining heat. And water, on the other hand, will lose heat. Okay, heat loss. Water is going to lose heat. How? From 100 degrees Celsius. Let's say when it loses all its heat, let's say it becomes 0 degrees Celsius. Just to prove that this is wrong. 0 degrees Celsius, what will happen? How much energy will be required? Q equal ms delta theta. So let's find this particular Q, that is m is 0.1. Specific capacity 4200 into 100. So that value is, if you see carefully, how much is that? 4.2 into 10 to the power 4 joules. 4.20 into 10 to the power 4 joules. So this doesn't have to happen, because if this happens, we have 4.2 into 10 to the power 4 joules, but we need only this much of energy for whole ice to melt. Therefore, what's going to happen? Water is going to cool down and come to a final temperature. Ice is going to completely melt and become water at another temperature. So I'll go another step. It becomes water at a certain temperature, theta degrees Celsius. And here, what has actually happened is 100 degrees Celsius water has become theta degrees Celsius water. Ice is completely melting, and then its temperature, the temperature of that water is increasing. So now we need to analyze everything from the beginning. That is, I'll write it here. Heat gain by ice equal heat lost by water. Right. So if I put that into equations, heat gain by ice is, first of all, ml part should be considered, plus the same, I'll say mi, okay, mass of ice. And here, mass of ice, specific heat capacity of water, change in temperature 1, because there's a temperature change here. Equal to heat lost by water is this, mass of water, specific capacity of water, change in temperature 2, change in temperature here. Right. So mi is 0.1, L is 3.36 into 10 to the power 5 plus again mi is 0.1 into specific capacity of water is 4200, and the temperature difference here, people, how much is that? Theta minus 0. So that is theta equal to, on the other side again, mass of water is 0.1, 100 gram of boiling water into specific capacity is 4200, and the temperature difference, people, that is 100 minus theta. From 100 it is reducing to theta. Okay, so how do I continue from here? How do I continue from here? Yeah, so I need to make theta the subject, but before that, can I simplify anything more? Yeah, let's see. Here you have 3.36 into 10 to the power 4, that is 33600. And well, here you have 420 theta plus 420 theta. On the other side, you have 420 to 100, that is 420 this thing minus 420 theta. Hope you all understood it. Right, so some zeros can be neglected here, can cancel out here. 1 0 1 0, here another 0, here another 0. So ultimately I'm getting what, 84 theta on the left side equal to, on the right side it is 4200 minus 3360. Okay, is this a multiple of 42, people? Yeah, no, this is 42 into 8, I think. Okay, yeah, very interesting. 42 into 8. So if you simplify this by 42, it is 2 theta. And this is 100 minus 80. If I go to theta is 10. I'm getting 10 degrees Celsius for theta. That means the answer should be third, isn't it? Final temperature is that. Yeah, third is the answer. Third is the answer. Okay, just you didn't have to do this step. You didn't have to do this step, but I just wanted to make sure that this is wrong, because I just wanted to prove that water's heat, if the water has the heat and the water possesses, is enough to melt the entire ice. Okay, that's why I wanted to prove. Anyway, even if you had done it this way from the beginning, you would have got this answer. Huh? So you can do this. Right, fine. Infinite number of bodies, each of mass simple m, are placed in the distances r, 2r, 4r, 8r, and so on from point O in straight line. What is the magnitude of gravitational potential at point O? There's point O here, and from point O at different distances from point O. Okay, they have kept now masses. The masses they have kept same mass, some simple mass. No? Right. So there's a mass here, and then there's a mass here. There's mass here. There's mass here. It goes on like that. The next mass will be here at 16R, correct? So M, another M, another M. Likewise, there are lots of masses kept. So I'm not drawing the infinite number of bodies. If you mark the distances, from there, the distances is R0, R, here 2R, here 4R, and this is 8R, and this is 16R. It goes on like that, right? What is the magnitude of gravitational potential at point O? Fine. So you need to find the gravitational potential at point O. Now, what is the equation, people? We know gravitational potential is given by gravitational potential, that's given V, actually V, that's given by minus Gm over R, minus Gm over R. So gravitational potential at O, that will be equal to, you have to add the gravitational potentials created by each of these masses. So that is going to be minus Gm over simple R, minus Gm over 2R, minus Gm over 4R, minus Gm over 8R, minus Gm over 16R, enough. Minus, it goes on like that. All right, fine. And then who is common here? Minus GM, you can take it out. And OR also you can take it out. And inside, what will I have now? Is 1 plus half plus 1 over 4 plus 1 over 6 plus 1 over, not 1 over 6, 1 over 8 plus 1 over 16 plus it goes on like this. Okay, right. Magnitude. So maybe we can avoid the negative sign, right? Okay, guys, how do you find the addition of this? Minus GM over R is there ready for you. How do you find the addition of this? Is a geometric progression, isn't it? A geometric progression like 1 half, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16. It goes on like that. No? So the what is the common what do you call that ratio? No? Common ratio, mathematical terms between them. What is the common ratio, people? Tell me, hurry up. Between 1 and 2, then between this and this. What is the common ratio? We use simple R for that. If I can remember right, O-level maths, half. See, simple R is half. So what you need is, you need Sn, the addition of all these terms. Sn. What is the equation for Sn? Sn, if I can remember right. Okay, come on. 1 minus R to the power n over 1 minus R into A. Can someone confirm if it's correct? Yeah, this is the one. And the Sn is equal to 1 minus R to the power n. Now, R here is half to the power n, half to the power a very large value, like very large value. I'll just put infinity, but I don't like putting it anyway. A very large value over 1 minus half into A. A is 1. The first term is 1. Look at this. First term is 1. So finally, you will end up in this Sn is equal to, guys, half to the power infinity is a 0, because 1 to the power infinity is 1. Let's say 1 to the power 1000. 1 to the power 1000 is 1. 2 to the power 1000 is a very large value. So 1 to very large value is almost 0. 1 minus 0 divided by 1 minus half, that is half. So it is 1 divided by half, it's actually 2. When you add all these things, it's 2. So into 2. O-level max is involved here. So the final answer is minus 2gm over R. Is there an answer like that? We have the fourth answer. Yeah, fourth one is the answer. They are asking for the magnitude now, so we can forget about the negative sign and we can get the fourth answer. So I don't know whether they will ask a question like this at the final exam, but even if they ask, why isn't it fair? It's O-level, man. It's O-level, see? Didn't you study this in O-level? Is it there in O-level or not? This one. Yeah, right. But you people have forgotten, is it? Right, fine. But I have my doubts. I don't know whether they will ask about this at the final exam, but in model papers, I have seen such questions. So don't forget these things. Now, you put 1 minus R to the power n for when the common ratio is less than 1, no? When it's a fraction. But when the common ratio is like 2 or 3, more than 1, we put R n minus 1. So that I can remember. So if I can remember who did all levels a long time back, people should be able to remember these things, small things, right? Okay, but very rare in the final exams. I don't think they will go this far. I don't think they'll go this far, but safe to know these things. Now we'll go back to 49. This is the 50th question, 50th MCQ. What does this say? They have given us a pressure versus volume graph, and they are asking us to plot the corresponding temperature versus volume graph. We did this actually on the thermodynamics. I explained you a lots of around 3 or 4. We did 3 or 4 exercises where we did convert PV graph to TV graph, TV graph to PV graph, PV graph to VT graph. We did different things. The concept is same. Right, let's start then. PV graph of a certain mass of ideal gas is shown in the figure. Which of the following graph best represents the variation of volume of the gas with absolute temperature? So there are just 2 processes, A to B, B to C. You have to just analyze one by one. Now, when you take A to B, what is happening? When you take A to B people, you can see pressure is constant. That's the first point. Pressure constant. If pressure is constant, we know we can apply Charles law. That is volume proportional to temperature. Temperature is increasing when you go from A to B. That means volume should increase. volume should increase. Yeah. So how many graphs? And I mean, VT graph, V proportional T means in a TV graph, the line should look like this, a straight line, which will go through the origin eventually. So definitely these are wrong. It's either 2 or 5. It's either 2 or 5. An isobaric process, this one. Name is not that important, but yeah, isobaric process, a process which is taking place at constant pressure. If not, we learned it as constant pressure process. And when you take B to C, now B to C can be a little distracting. By the looks of it, it looks like what process? It looks like it is, it obeys Boyle's law. It looks like it is an isothermal process, but we have to check it. They have given you the numbers now. You have to check it. Now, when you go from B to C, you take temperature at B. How do you find temperature at B? Now, if you go to this equation, PV equal nRT, according to this question, it's a fixed amount of gas, so number of moles is constant, R is anywhere constant. You can say the temperature at a certain point is proportional to the multiplication PV. So temperature at B, if you take, it is proportional to, check the multiplication of P and B, right? At B, pressure is 2, I mean, I'll write it like this, pressure at B, volume at B, yeah? Right, pressure at B is 2 into 10 to the power 6, and volume at B is 0.003, and that will give you how much? 6 into 10 to the power 3, 6 into 10 to the power 3, I'll just leave it as a number, 6 into 10 to the power 3. But look at the temperature at C. So temperature at C should be proportional to pressure at C into volume at C. That is equal to, pressure at C is 0.8 into 10 to the power 6 into the volume is 0.005. And that is not the same. Now, people, that is not the same, because when you multiply these two, it will give you 0.4 into 10 to the power 3. So temperature at B is greater than temperature at C. So not an isothermal process. My point is, 2 is wrong. What is the meaning of 2? 2 says from B to C, temperature doesn't change. So this is definitely an adiabatic. It could be an adiabatic process. It can be an adiabatic process. 5th is the answer. So you might have figured out AB, but since once you saw this curve, PV curve, this is how you draw a Boyle's law curve. Once you saw that, if you straight away assume that it is obeying Boyle's law, it's wrong, because adiabatic process also looks like that, people. Adiabatic process looks like this. Now we have learned the red color one is isothermal. Adiabatic can be the red color, black color. Adiabatic. So careful. So in this case, it is an adiabatic process, not an isothermal process. Therefore, the answer is 5th, and I think this is also from one of the older FWC papers, if I can remember right. Now, BC is not an isothermal process. Why? Because temperature at B and temperature at C are not equal. Isothermal process means temperature constant. That is what isothermal means. But we have mathematically proven that temperature at B and temperature at C are not the same. So you can't expect a graph like this.